I am Sam Otten, and with me is Jason Book, and in this video we're going to be reviewing Superman issue 48, which is written by Gene Yang, with art by Porter and Syaf, mostly Howard Porter, though, continuing on this book. So we have here now the Superman title entering Savage Dawn stuff, where Superman, across multiple books, is dealing with Vandal Savage and the offspring of Vandal Savage, one of which is Hoarder Root. It feels like a little bit of a new arc starting in the Superman book. We start off with some Steve Trevor stuff. We've got Kingslayer. We've got some political overtones. And then that leads us to the Hoarder Root stuff with the villain, the Puzzler. So let's just start off with that, how this book kicked off and the first few scenes. What'd you make of that, Jason?
Well, overall, I thought it's, getting there. It's going to be a lot better than what we've been complaining about the last few issues. I like the way that things are progressing to what seems like Superman will probably get his powers back, at least to some extent. But I really think they've just taken their sweet ass time getting to this. If this was an old school comic book, like, you could have gotten to this in like 2 issues versus however many it's been in this storyline. So I like that it's getting there. I like the stuff with Superman and Steve Trevor, but I did find myself being like, man, if this was the old Superman, he'd be talking like a little bit more down to Steve Trevor. But it gives it an interesting kind of, shift in the way that Superman obviously skews a little bit younger in the New 52, and obviously without his powers, maybe he feels a little more at level with Steve.
Yeah, that's right. Maybe because it has been, 8 or 9 or 10 months of him being depowered, maybe he's kind of been humbled like that. Yeah, I like those interactions. I think it's good with the Superman Wonder Woman relationship. I thought it was good to have some Steve Trevor, some interactions where it's just the two of them, and I thought there were some levels to that. My overall impression was actually similar to yours, which, as I was reading this issue, I was just kind of getting excited because I'm like, oh, they're getting things back on track. Like, if it's starting to feel like more like a Superman book. I thought just the writing was better in terms of the setting and the action. And it wasn't kind of out of left field. It's like, oh no, I can actually see that they're trying to set something up. They're putting a story in place.
Yeah.
So I feel like this issue is kind of like the turning point of hopefully several issues of some good stuff, which I'm glad it's getting into the right direction, because I want issue 50 to be kind of special, or issue 52, coming up just after that, to be special. So they needed this one to get things on the right track.
Yeah, I agree with you for sure.
And some of the things I think were on the right track are the Kryptonite. I think the Hoarder Root and the Puzzler stuff. It's still, these are kind of new villains. They're not your traditional Superman villains, but I still liked the fact that they're bringing in this theme of the digital era and information and privacy and that kind of stuff, which I thought Gene Yang was going to do like whole hog from the beginning, but instead he like floundered around and he went to this myth brawl stuff, which was different than like the digital, information 21st century stuff. So I'm glad that he's kind of bringing it back around to a theme that I think makes more sense to explore. And I liked it with the Puzzler coming in, where the Puzzler, he kind of gets his consciousness transferred to this kind of robot android thing. And I liked those overtones of really the question of, what does consciousness mean? Are you something separate from all of your data and all of your experiences? And I think that's like a relevant question now, because people are putting everything on Facebook or on Twitter, or there's this thing like, if it's not on Instagram or social media, it didn't really happen. So like a lot of people's lives and who they are is wrapped up in their data or their metadata. And so I think that's this good question of, is that my consciousness, or is it still somehow my body? And I thought that was a nice scene at the beginning with the Puzzler.
Yeah, I like that as well. I think maybe that villain might belong in a different book in a way to me. The art as well didn't really help it. Like, it was kind of sloppy in parts with some of those scenes where I think a better artist could have made it look a little more polished. But I like the idea of that little villain. But they really could have came up with a better name than the Puzzler. It sounded like the Riddler's like kind of guy in training or something like that.
Right, yeah, I agree about the name, because nothing about the character really was
No.
about a puzzle.
No.
Yeah.
I was like, they just
yeah.
reached into a bag for that name or what?
Yeah, I agree. That was a little weird. It holds it back. And the art, I think you're right, the art could have been a little sharper or a little bit more compelling, but I'm just still so happy that it's not John Romita Jr.'s art.
Yeah,
so
for
like,
sure.
I still think it looks better. And again, I've kind of come to this place where John Romita Jr. still did the cover here. And I don't think he's a bad artist just himself, but I think he was just a bad fit for Superman.
He was.
Yeah.
And Porter has done way better stuff than this too. He did the first run of Grant Morrison's JLA years ago. You
Yeah.
look at that, the way he drew Superman compared to now, it's
Hmm.
not even nearly as good. So I know that he's capable of delivering some more polished stuff as well.
Yeah, I think there might have been some time issues because that might be why Saif had to come in and help out on some
Yeah,
pages too.
that's probably a good call. Yeah.
So we had the Steve Trevor stuff, we had the Puzzler stuff. We go into the Argus archive. So again, this is like where I think the writing is better
Mm.
because if you are exploring this data and information, then the setting can actually match that theme by going into these archives of Argus's data and where they've been collecting their stuff. So I'm kind of like, okay, yes, this is like better writing. The setting
Mm.
should actually make sense with the kind of story that you're telling.
Hmm.
And then we got all the Kryptonite stuff. So like the last part of the issue is Superman trying out this Kryptonite. And Gene Yang did an interview with DC All Access. You can see it on YouTube where he talked about him and Greg Pak had the idea of chemotherapy, kind of inspiring them
Mm.
about how Superman can get his powers back.
Hmm.
And they said chemotherapy is this interesting thing where you actually damage yourself so that you can heal and become better in the long run.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
kind of interesting, huh?
yeah, so they said that's where they got the idea. So in this issue, they kind of explain mechanically or biologically why Superman has lost his powers. He has like this layer of like damaged cells or something that don't allow him to absorb the solar radiation.
Mm.
So he's going to try to use kryptonite to burn that away and hopefully, get some powers back. So what'd you make of the whole kryptonite angle at the end?
I like it. It's just, as I said earlier, it's taking its sweet time getting there. As I was reading the issue, I was getting excited for him to get a glimpse of powers back. And then I see that in this modern day of expanded storytelling, like it's not necessarily written for the trade, but it definitely takes its time getting there.
Hmm.
We end with him just being in the vault of kryptonite and it's like, okay, well, how many more issues are we going to drag this on for? Let's see something happen right away. Like
Hmm.
I miss that old school mentality. Like maybe even if it's just the guy goes to hit him with something and it suddenly breaks over his skin and he's like, oh, it's coming back a bit. Like they're missing out on some good storytelling things here that really work well in movies and animation. So
Yeah.
yeah, I liked it, but just let's get to it, please. And to finish for me, I kind of wonder what they're going to do with this whole once Superman gets back to normal, that everyone knows he's Clark Kent. I really
Hmm.
smell a reboot for DC because this is
Hmm.
kind of a genie to put back in the bottle. I think they might really need to do that.
Hmm. Yeah, you're right. Because the kryptonite angle, that's a nice, storytelling way to get his powers back, but it doesn't do anything about the identity being out
No,
there.
no, and
Yeah.
that's huge for the Superman mythos, right?
Yeah, and I haven't really seen anything planted that could be a way to get his identity back. Because, like, in the Batman book, which we also have been reviewing, they planted this machine that can kind of retrain Batman. So it's
Yeah,
like, okay, that's there if you need it to
yeah.
put Batman. But I haven't seen anything planted for, like, oh, that's a way that they could get the identity back.
Yeah, because it's funny. I was reading an old wizard and it had this article about comic stores you never got to see. And way back in the day, Siegel and Schuster had this idea to out Superman's identity, like in 1940 or something. And DC totally nixed it because they're like, that's half the appeal of the character. If everyone knows who he is, what are you going to write about, right?
Hmm.
So I really hope something comes of that because the more I think of him pulling off the glasses and going from Clark Kent into Superman, that's like the half of his iconic thing.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we have the rumors about Rebirth, but nothing official for what that's going to entail. So
That's right. Yeah.
that could be part of it, but
Hmm.
not sure. So, and I think you're right about the pacing. They've kind of taken their time, maybe a little bit more than they needed to. But I got to think that it was just because they saw that number 50. And so I think they basically said, or the editors said, all right, this stuff needs to happen in 50. You've got 7 issues before then, so you need to stretch it out because we want that to happen in 50. So I got to think that that's probably what happened.
Yeah, and I mean, like we've seen the cover, and what are they going to do? Like the thing, like in Superman 3, where the old Superman and the current Superman fight, and then they meld into one person, or something. Because Man of Steel is coming out, and comic companies, sorry, Batman versus Superman's coming out.
Hmm.
Comic companies like to have things kind of what it's supposed to be when the movie comes out. Like
Hmm.
Superman is who he's supposed to be if a kid wants to go buy the comic after watching the movie, right?
Yeah.
So I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but I really hope they get things kind of back on track with Superman.
Hmm. Yeah, I think they've pointed it a little bit more in the right direction. They still got some more work to do. I'm curious to see the things that you were mentioning. I'm
Mm.
also curious to see how the possible interlocking is going to work because they're now saying like this issue that we just read, refers to Superman Wonder Woman 25,
Hmm.
where Superman was made mortal. And that's actually a really good issue for people if they want to check it out.
Yeah.
And now this one says it's continued in Action 49, so it seems like they're more interlocking the Superman books. Um,
Yes.
so I'm going to see how that plays out. Because before this, they were trying to have them be independent, but sort of, you know, running in parallel, but you don't need to read all of them. Now they're kind of
Hmm.
pointing you, sort of saying like you're supposed to be reading all the Superman books.
Yeah, and kind of as we've said before, sometimes too many cooks can spoil the broth. And
Hmm.
you look at how great the work's been on that Batman book month in and month out.
Hmm.
It's something that Superman could maybe take as an idea for the future. It's okay to have a self-contained book if it's consistently amazing, right?
And don't pollute it with it having to fit other little crossovers and stuff. Yeah.
Exactly, because Superman can be used in other books by just talking about him, and sometimes that's even more powerful than showing him
Hmm.
lifting up a bus,
Yeah.
full of kids to rescue, or just talking about him like, oh, he was so fast, he was in and out and saved a bunch of people.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, a little bit of stuff to be happy about. Getting things on the right direction, but still a lot of questions. So we'll have to look to the future for those.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what happens, that's for sure.